At the bottom of South America, the land begins to break apart. Mountains collapse into the sea. Forests twist sideways in winds that never stop. Entire towns cling to the edge of existence. And beyond them, nothing. Just Antarctica, a place so wild. Even now, parts of it still feel undiscovered. A place that isn't just beautiful, it's unpredictable. It can welcome you with silence and terrify you with it. We are going to travel to the edge of the world to find out what kind of life survives here and why so many who come never really leave. This is Patagonia, a place at the uttermost part of the earth. So distant, so strange. It still carries the feeling of somewhere not fully known. But Patagonia isn't just beautiful. It is a land of exotic mystery, a place filled with forgotten legends, old outposts, and stories left behind by people who came here searching for something they could not find anywhere else. It can welcome you with silence and unsettle you with it. We are going to travel to the edge of the world, to a fractured wilderness that has drawn wanderers, outlaws and dreamers for generations, to find out what kind of life survives here and why so many who come never really leave. Patagonia stretches across the southern tip of South America, a vast, almost unimaginable expanse. And yet, for all its scale, what defines it most is not what is there, but what isn't. Empty roads, isolated settlements, wind-scoured landscapes that seem to go on forever. This is a place shaped as much by absence as by presence. A place where old stories still linger. Stories of bandits once welcomed here. Of settlers building lives at the far edge of the world. Of travelers chasing almost forgotten legends through a land that resists explanation. Patagonia does not promise comfort. It offers something rarer: distance, silence, perspective. You do not come here to conquer it. You come here to listen, to wander, to be humbled by a place that still feels larger than human ambition. And at the southern edge of this immense and mysterious land, our journey begins. At the southern edge of Patagonia, at the very bottom of the inhabited world, lies a city with an unsettling reputation. Ushuaia, the southernmost city on Earth. The last streetlights before Antarctica. A place that feels less like a beginning and more like the edge of everything. But this place wasn't built for travelers, it was built for prisoners. In the late 1800s, Argentina turned this remote corner of Patagonia into a penal colony. Because here, escape was impossible. No walls needed, only distance, the ocean, the forests, the cold. A wilderness so vast and unforgiving, the land itself became the prison. To run meant facing emptiness in every direction. And yet, from that isolation, a town began to rise. Built not by settlers chasing opportunity, but by the hands of those who longed to leave. The prisoners built its roads, its docks, its railways, stone by stone, track by track. They helped carve order into the edge of the world. There's something hauntingly poetic about that. The people who once searched for a way out of Patagonia ended up building a place that would one day invite others in. What was once a place of exile became a place of arrival. And even now you can feel that tension here, between isolation and discovery, between punishment and wonder. Leaving Ushuaia, we enter the Beagle Channel, a narrow passage between worlds. between land and sea, between what feels known and what still feels untouched. Named after the HMS Beagle, the ship that carried a young Charles Darwin through these waters nearly 2 centuries ago. Imagine seeing this for the first time. No satellite maps, no weather forecasts, no certainty about what waited ahead. Only fog, ice, and the unsettling weight of the unknown. The horizon disappears into mist. The water moves quietly beneath you. Every direction feels remote, unclaimed, as if the world has narrowed to nothing but sea, sky, and silence. Then, life appears. Sea lions gathered on jagged rock islands, resting, watching, utterly indifferent to our presence. They do not move for us. They do not care that we have crossed oceans to be here. Their world has not changed. It remains governed by the same rhythms, the same cold water, the same winds, the same ancient stillness. Ours has. We arrive with cameras, schedules, notifications waiting in our pockets, and yet somehow, none of it seems to matter here. In this place, modern life feels distant, almost irrelevant. The noise we carry with us begins to fade, and for a moment, drifting through the Beagle Channel, it feels possible to see the world the way early travelers once did. Not as something mapped and measured, but as something vast, mysterious, and still capable of humbling us. Then, suddenly, the wilderness becomes absurdly adorable. After the silence, after the wind, after the vast, almost intimidating emptiness of Patagonia, you hear it first. A soft shuffle, tiny feet against stone, and then thousands of penguins. No dramatic entrance, no ceremony, no awareness that they are part of something extraordinary. Just tiny bodies, moving with total confidence, waddling in every direction, stopping, turning, continuing on as if they have somewhere important to be. And perhaps they do. At Martillo Island, Magellanic penguins return every spring, year after year. The same beaches, the same nesting grounds, the same ritual, an ancient homecoming repeated with quiet precision. Some travel across vast stretches of open ocean, through cold water and uncertainty, only to arrive here. Exactly here. Not just to Patagonia, not just to this coastline, but to this exact place. The same narrow shore, the same familiar ground, as if some invisible thread is pulling them back. How they find it, we still don't fully understand. And standing there, watching them, you realize how comforting that mystery feels. In a world obsessed with explanations, with maps, with answers, Patagonia still keeps some secrets. It lets you witness something beautiful, without fully revealing how it works. And maybe that's the point. Not everything here is meant to be solved. Some things are simply meant to be admired, to be felt, to remind us that even at the edge of the world, wonder still exists. Further south, the sea changes. What was once beautiful becomes hostile. Ahead lies Cape Horn, a place that feels less like geography and more like a warning. For centuries, this was one of the world's great thresholds, a place sailors approached with fear, superstition, and prayer. Before easier routes existed, every ship moving between oceans had to face this. The Drake Passage, a violent meeting point, a place where waters collide and certainty disappears. Storms rise without warning, fog closes in, the horizon vanishes. The sea lifts itself into walls, waves towering above the ship. So immense they seem capable of swallowing not only wood and steel, but memory itself. Entire ships vanished here. Crews disappeared into the cold. Thousands of sailors left for these waters and never returned. Their stories dissolved into the wind. Standing here, you begin to understand why humans invented myths, why they gave names to monsters, why they imagined spirits living in the sea. Because places like this refuse to feel ordinary. They demand something larger than explanation. Patagonia does that. It turns landscape into legend. It makes the natural world feel ancient and unknowable. At Cape Horn, you do not feel like an observer. You feel very small, very temporary. A witness to a force that has humbled generations before you and will humble generations after. And in that moment, watching the dark water move beneath an endless sky, you understand. Some places are too powerful to be described only by facts. Places like this demand myth. And then, Patagonia changes again, as if it refuses to let you settle into any one version of itself. The chaos of ocean disappears behind you. The crashing waves, the restless horizon, the endless movement of water, and in its place, stone, still, ancient, unmoving. Or so it seems. A head rising from the earth with impossible force. Granite towers, sharp, massive, silent. They stand like unfinished cathedrals, as if something enormous began carving monuments here and simply stopped, leaving behind only pillars, raw and exposed. Structures too grand to feel accidental. This is Torres del Paine, one of Patagonia's most unforgettable landscapes. A place so often photographed, so often admired from a distance, that it can feel strangely familiar before you ever arrive. And yet, nothing prepares you for the reality of standing here. Not the pictures, not the stories, not the imagination you built before coming. Because photographs can capture shape, they can capture color, they can preserve a moment, but they cannot prepare you for scale, for how small your own body feels beneath these towering walls of stone, for how your eyes struggle to follow the granite upward, for how the mountains seem less like scenery and more like presence, watching, waiting. They cannot prepare you for the silence, not emptiness, but true silence, the kind interrupted only by your own footsteps, by distant water, by the sound of a wind moving through open space. And the wind here, you feel it before you understand it. It doesn't simply pass through, it arrives, sudden, sharp, alive, pulling at your clothes, pushing against your balance, demanding your attention, as if Patagonia itself is reminding you, you are not separate from this landscape. You are inside it, subject to it. And just when you begin to adjust, the weather changes. Again, sunlight spills across the stone, the towers glow. For a brief moment, everything feels calm, warm even. Then rain, fast, cold, unannounced. Clouds gather without warning. The peaks vanish behind gray. The path darkens, the air shifts. And then, snow. Light at first, a scattering. Enough to blur the edges of what you were just looking at. Enough to remind you how quickly certainty disappears here. And then, just as suddenly, sun again, breaking through, illuminating wet rock, turning the landscape into something entirely new. Patagonia refuses to hold still. It changes minute by minute, sky by sky, light by light, as if no single version of this place can ever be trusted. And somehow, that makes it feel more alive. Not like scenery arranged for visitors, not like a destination waiting to be photographed, but like something breathing, something shifting around you, something impossible to fully possess. You don't simply look at Torres del Paine. You experience it. You endure it. You surrender to it. Because every hour here feels different. Every glance reveals another transformation. The mountains disappear, then return. The colors fade, then intensify. The silence deepens, then the wind tears through it again. And standing here, beneath granite towers older than memory, you begin to understand something essential about Patagonia. Its beauty is not static. It is movement. It is unpredictability. It is the refusal to become ordinary. Perhaps that's why places like this stay with us. Not because we captured them, but because we couldn't. Because no photograph can hold the cold in the air, the force of the wind, the feeling of standing beneath something so immense. It rearranges your sense of scale. Torres del Paine doesn't ask to be understood, only witnessed. And for a brief moment, as sunlight returns once more to the granite, you feel it. That rare sensation of being exactly where you are supposed to be. Small, silent, completely present. Inside a landscape that refuses to stop becoming itself. Far from the mountains that draw travelers south, there is another Patagonia, quieter, slower. A Patagonia measured not by landmarks, but by rhythm, by wind moving through endless grass, by the soft shifting of horse hooves against the earth, by days that begin with first light and end only when the sky disappears. Out here, the land stretches so far that distance becomes difficult to understand. No fences breaking the horizon, no urgency, only open space. And the people who have learned how to belong to it. The gauchos, figures moving across the steppe with a calm that feels almost inseparable from the landscape itself. Weathered hands, unhurried movements, eyes that seem trained not to search for anything, but simply to notice. They do not fight Patagonia. They move with it. They understand what the wind means. They read the sky before it changes. They know how silence can carry meaning. Watching them, something becomes clear. This life is not built on conquest. It is built on listening, on patience, on learning to exist without trying to dominate the world around you. And in that quiet, something unexpected begins to happen. The noise you arrived with, the thoughts, the distractions, the endless inner conversation begins to fade. There is no signal here, no interruption, only space. Enough space, perhaps, to hear something often buried beneath modern life. Your own thoughts, your own breath, your own presence. Patagonia has a way of stripping everything else away. The urgency, the performance, the need to constantly move forward, until all that remains is you, standing in the wind, listening. And somehow, in a place that feels so empty, you feel more fully present than you have in a very long time. Perhaps that is what keeps some people here. Not the beauty, not the isolation, but the rare and unsettling clarity that arrives when the world grows quiet enough for you to finally hear yourself. Then comes one of Patagonia's most unforgettable spectacles. A moment that feels less like sightseeing and more like standing face to face with a living force. Perito Moreno Glacier, a vast wall of ancient ice, restless, immense, and impossibly alive. Unlike so many glaciers quietly disappearing into memory, this one still advances. It moves forward, slowly, relentlessly. Not enough for the eye to track, but enough for the earth beneath your feet to remind you. It groans. It breathes. It speaks in sounds older than language. Listen. At first, it's only a distant fracture, a sharp report somewhere deep inside the blue. Then another, and another. The glacier is never truly still. Every few minutes, tension builds inside this frozen giant, until entire towers of ice, some as tall as buildings, shear away from the face. For one suspended second, they hang in silence. Then they plunge into the water below with explosive force, sending waves racing across the lake. The sound doesn't reach your ears first. It reaches your chest. A deep concussion you feel in your ribs. A reminder that this is not scenery. This is motion. This is power. This is Earth revealing itself, not as something fixed and permanent, but as something alive, changing, shifting, breaking and rebuilding itself before your eyes. You stand there unable to speak, tiny against a wall of ice, tiny against time itself. For a moment, everything else disappears. Your thoughts, your plans, your sense of scale. And all that remains is the sound of a glacier breathing. Not metaphorically, literally. Patagonia teaches patience. Not gently, not kindly. It teaches you to wait, to surrender your schedule, your expectations, your need for certainty. No place proves that more than Fitzroy. For days the mountain may refuse to reveal itself. You wake before dawn, pull on frozen gloves, step into the wind, and begin to hike. The trail stretches ahead in silence. Clouds hang low. The granite peaks remain hidden somewhere beyond them. Only hinted at, never seen. You stop, you wait, you freeze. Nothing. Only the cold. Only the vastness. Only the feeling that here, at the uttermost part of the earth, nature decides what you are allowed to witness. Patagonia has always drawn people for this reason. Travelers chasing almost forgotten legends, wandering through a landscape filled with strange beauty, old stories, and the feeling that something extraordinary might appear at any moment. And then, without warning, the sky opens, a break in the cloud, a shaft of light, and there it is, Fitzroy, sharp, impossible. A mountain so sudden and so precise, it feels less like land, and more like an apparition, floating above the world. For a moment no one speaks. All the waiting, the cold, the uncertainty, the hours of climbing through doubt, suddenly make sense. Because this is what Patagonia gives you. Not guarantees, not easy beauty, revelation. A glimpse of something that cannot be scheduled or earned, only received. And maybe that's why people return. Not because they know they'll see it again, but because once you've experienced a moment like this, when the clouds part and the impossible appears, you spend the rest of your life hoping it might happen one more time. We spend our lives trying to control everything. Schedules, notifications, comfort, outcomes. We plan our days down to the minute. We check the forecast before stepping outside. We refresh our messages. We rearrange our lives around predictability. We tell ourselves that if we prepare enough, if we organize enough, if we anticipate every possibility, we can stay in control. But Patagonia doesn't care. It moves by its own rules. And the moment you arrive here, you feel it. Weather changes without warning. A clear morning can disappear into cloud and wind. Roads end before you expect them to. Maps stop being useful. Ice melts, land shifts. Distances stretch longer than they seem. Bodies tire. Legs grow heavy. Hands go numb. The cold settles deeper than you planned for. And sometimes, plans fail. Not dramatically, quietly. A delayed crossing. A trail you cannot finish. A destination hidden behind fog. Moments that remind you how little control you truly have. And slowly, something begins to shift inside you. The need to manage every detail. The pressure to stay ahead. To optimize. To predict. To force certainty onto an uncertain world. It starts to fade, because here control feels fragile, almost imaginary. Patagonia strips that illusion away, not cruelly, honestly. It reminds us that not everything can be organized, not everything can be fixed, not everything can be forced into happening just because we want it to. Some things must simply be faced, accepted, lived. You cannot command the wind to calm. You cannot ask the mountains to reveal themselves. You cannot rush the ice. You can only be present. Adapt, wait, and somehow, that feels deeply comforting. To let go. To stop resisting what cannot be changed. To admit quietly that we are not in charge. That nature does not bend for our convenience. That time moves at its own pace. That beauty often appears only when we stop demanding it. And in that surrender, something unexpected happens. The tension leaves your body. The noise in your mind grows quiet. For the first time in a long time, you are no longer trying to control the moment. You are simply inside it. And that, more than the landscapes, more than the silence, more than the distance, may be Patagonia's greatest gift: freedom. At the edge of the world, you expect to find endings. The final road, the last inhabited place, the point where maps feel thin and everything beyond them becomes emptiness. You expect distance, isolation. A sense that you have arrived somewhere that exists only to remind you how far you've come. But Patagonia offers something unexpected. Instead of an ending, it feels like a beginning. A beginning of attention. A beginning of humility. A beginning of seeing the world differently. Because here something ancient still survives. A reminder that wildness still exists. Not the curated kind. Not the kind preserved behind fences or explained on signs. But true wildness, untamed, unbothered, uninterested in being understood. A reminder that silence still exists. Real silence. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of something deeper. The kind of silence you feel in the wind crossing empty land. In the pause before a glacier cracks. In the stillness between waves at the edge of the sea. A reminder that mystery still exists. That despite our maps, our satellites, our endless need to explain, some places remain beyond understanding. And maybe they are meant to. Maybe some places are not meant to be understood, only felt. The wind continues, crossing the steppe as it always has, carrying stories no one can hear clearly. The glaciers continue, moving slowly, breathing, breaking, remaking the landscape grain by grain. The penguins return, faithfully, to the same shores, the same ritual, the same unspoken certainty. The mountains wait, silent behind cloud, unchanged by our presence, unmoved by our timelines. And Patagonia remains exactly what it has always been. A distant land of emptiness and wonder. A place where travelers come searching for landscapes and leave carrying something harder to name. Perspective. Stillness. A renewed sense of how small we are and how beautiful that can feel. At the edge of the world, where roads disappear, where certainty fades, where nature still makes the rules, something deeper begins. Not out there, not in the glaciers, not in the wind, but inside you. And long after you leave Patagonia, that feeling remains.